Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Gretchen, and today I'm going to be doing another Women's Prize for Fiction long list review, and today's book is River East, River West by Aubre Lescure. This book is a dual narrative, and it takes place in 2008, and also there's a narrative taking place in 1985 as well. So the first timeline that we start the book with is 2008, and we meet Alva. And Alva is a 14-year-old Chinese American. She was born in China, but her mother is American and has lived in China for, I think it's around 20 plus years. And the book opens with her mother, Sloane, marrying a man by the name of Luu Fang, and he is a wealthy businessman. And the first chapter is actually kind of interesting because we hear it from Alva's perspective, but she is talking about the wedding and all of the chatter that's happening that she's overhearing during the ceremony about her mother kind of almost like being a gold digger and coming in and stealing Luu Fang. But in all actuality, we soon learn that Sloane and Luu Fang have known each other for a very, very long time, and it's not just a marriage of convenience for Sloane, and she's not necessarily marrying him for his money. But before we get to that, there is a little more depth to Alva's initial narrative. We learn that as a 14-year-old who has had her mother alone and all to herself most of her life, Alva doesn't know her father, and she has been raised by Sloane as a single mom her entire life. And having Luu Fang as part of her life now as a stepfather is a really tough transition for her. She is really not sure how to process it. She doesn't like him necessarily, and she finds him being a part of her life almost intrusive because she has spent so much time alone with her mother. And another thing we learn about Alva is she's kind of struggling with her identity. So she has an American mother that's lived in China for a very long time. She is also the daughter of a Chinese man. So she's struggling with her identity as a Chinese American in China, which is kind of way different than what we often read about in a lot of narratives. It's usually about Chinese Americans that are living or existing in the States. So that was a very unique twist on the usual narrative that we get from a lot of books about immigration. Now, she is obsessed with all things America, and she is really deeply tied into her Chinese roots, but she wants more of the American side. She wants exposure to that. And she decides that she wants to go to this international school in Shanghai, and she almost looks to Luu Fang as an ally to get her to be able to do that. So even though she doesn't necessarily get along with him, she knows that in order to convince her mother that this is the right thing to do, she's going to need him as an ally to get that to happen. So we do start to see her guard come down a little bit more, and her start to accept Luu Fang as a part of her life and her potential way out in order for her to find what her true identity is, or what she thinks is going to be her source of happiness in life. So we go through a few chapters of her narrative, and then we switch to 1985, and it is from the perspective of Luu Fang. And at the beginning, when we meet Luu Fang, he is a poor man. He doesn't have a lot of prospects going on, and from a very young age, I believe in his early 20s, he actually meets Sloane, and they develop a very strong friendship. They have a very strong bond, and it eventually turns into something more. But we also have Luu Fang dealing with practically an arranged marriage to a woman that he doesn't necessarily love. He ends up having a child with that woman, and we get the perspective of Luu Fang as he is juggling his duty to be the family man, but his heart belonging to Sloane. And also, as all of this is happening, he's trying to make a name for himself and kind of dig himself out of poverty and become a wealthy businessman and make something of himself. So those two timelines and narratives are what we keep going back and forth between. And I really enjoyed the book for the most part. I think that there were a lot of very much redeeming qualities in this book. One thing that I will say is I found myself more drawn to Luu Fang's narrative, which is odd because I don't think that that was the intent of the author. I think that the focus should have been on Alva and everything that she was going through. And although I enjoyed that narrative and learning about her life, I was just much more fascinated with the dynamic of Luu Fang and his struggle with him dealing with the duty of his family and having a son and that father-son dynamic and relationship that they had, and how he juggled all of that while having a mistress, and eventually how all of that kind of worked itself out in the end to get to the wedding between him and Sloane 20 plus years later. So we really have a lot going on, and I just, like I said, I felt myself more interested in everything that Luu Fang had to say as opposed to Alva. Now, I'm not saying Alva's pieces weren't interesting. There was a lot going on there. Her main theme was her trying to find herself and her finding her identity, and she had a lot of bumps along the way. And this is also a book about her coming of age and her losing her innocence and her being so laser focused on finding out who she was that she really got herself into a lot of situations where she ended up losing herself along the way and never really got to find who she truly was. And I also really enjoyed the dynamic between Alva and Luu Fang, especially when she realized that he was an ally and that he was part of her ticket to get what she wanted, and how that really kind of changed the way that she treated him and how it really did develop their relationship a little more as the book progressed. Now, although this book had a lot of really important things to say and the writing was good, it was a book that I ended up giving 3.5 stars to. I think that the biggest issue that I had with this book is, like I said, I think that the author had a lot to say, and my focus was not likely on what the author intended the focus to be on. And I'm not really sure how I got lost. And I almost think that I would have enjoyed the story of Alva a lot more if it had not been for Luu Fang's narrative. If Luu Fang was just a character within Alva's story and remained that way, I think that this would have been a completely different book and I would have had a much different opinion about it. However, because she made Luu Fang a main character in his own right, in his own story, all that I kept thinking of whenever I was reading Alva's section was looking forward to more interactions with Luu Fang and herself. So I think that that is just one of my biggest complaints, is that I just really didn't know where to focus my attention, and I found myself craving what I believe was intended to be a side character and the main focus to be on Alva, when I was really more interested in everything that Luu Fang had to say. I also really liked this book in the sense that I mentioned this earlier, that it kind of gives us that different perspective. We're so used to reading books about immigrants that are in the UK or the United States or Canada, and how they struggle to find their identity amongst all of these other inhabitants of a country that is foreign to them. And here we have a girl who was born in China. She has lived there her entire life and she has Chinese roots, but she is actually feeling like an outsider because her mother is American, and she is craving all of those things outside of the culture that she knows. She's actually craving things that she doesn't even know firsthand. It's all, you know, secondhand from her mother. And I think that that was something really interesting, and not anything that I think that I've read in a book, kind of putting that narrative on, or flipping it upside down and seeing things from that perspective. So as far as the writing goes, I was really impressed with the writing. I thought that it was beautiful, and there were a lot of very poignant and touching moments that happened in the book. There were also some very horrific things. Alva gets herself into some not so great situations with an older man, and there are trigger warnings for that. So if you think you would be sensitive to anything related to relationship like that, I would definitely look into the trigger warnings. But yeah, I can definitely see how this book made it on to the long list. I think that it does definitely give the reader something to think about. I finished this book, you know, actually now it's been a while, it's been a few weeks, but I still think about it, and it's still making me think about all of the different things that Alva must be going through, and it really has given me a lot to kind of chew on. So with that being said, 3.5 might seem like a low rating for a book that I'm, you know, speaking pretty highly of, but this all comes down to, once again, I've struggled over the last few months with pacing in my reading. I found the sections with Alva to be a little disjointed. I found them to be a little clunky, whereas all of the narrative with Luu Fang I found to be more smooth and seamless, and I just enjoyed myself with those more. And it almost felt like there were two different authors that were writing each of the sections, and although I enjoyed both types of writing, they just didn't seem to work together, and that's why I rated it only a 3.5. But I will still call this book a win. I enjoyed it. There were definitely aspects of this I loved, but I did, like I said, feel like I was reading two different books every time we switched perspectives, and it just didn't have that cohesiveness that I needed. So at the end of the day, we're still gonna call it a win, and this was one of the better reads from the Women's Prize. And I do recommend this. I think that there are definitely going to be a lot of readers out there that can walk away from this book and take a lot of positive things away from it. So another book down. We're starting to be on the upswing, which is good. And I enjoyed this one, and I'm enjoying more of my Women's Prize reads as we continue, and I'm not in that slump or close to slump anymore. So I'm curious to know if you have read this book, did you have a similar experience where you thought that the two different narratives were so different from each other as far as the writing style goes that you almost felt like you were reading two books? Did you prefer Alva's narrative? Did you prefer Luu Fang's narrative? And yeah, what were your overall thoughts of this book? I still have several books to get through. I'm still chugging along with, but they are getting more enjoyable. So hopefully I'm able to turn those books over much quicker and I can get those reviews out to you soon. And until we read again, bye.